Hello everyone, the March balance patch is here, and with that, Reflux got 3 notable changes that I'd like to talk about in this video. The first one is a simple one. The Reflux engraving went from 16 to 20% damage, so a nice little increase across the board. The second change applies to Punishing Strike. The Unavoidable Fate tripod, that middle one that you see here, the one that turns it into an instant cast skill, went from 35% damage to 40% damage, so a nice little boost to our burst there. And the final change, and the main focus of this video, is to the skill Explosion. So Explosion has a tripod called Backfire, which, similar to Punishing Strike's Unavoidable Fate, turns it into an instant cast spell. But before this balance patch, its max level was 1, and it didn't actually increase the damage of the skill. But with this patch, at max rank, level 5, you can see here that it increases the damage of the skill by 40%. So of course there's a lot of talk over whether this skill is viable or not, or whether you should use it or not. So I wanted to kind of talk about the potential builds that you might want to consider when playing your standard crit instant cast reflux build. Now, everything I talk about in this video will be similarly applicable to Swiftness Reflux, so if you're playing that build, pretty much everything I say should be one-to-one, of course, with some minor changes in some tripods you might take, or some skill rotations and cooldowns and things like that. So bear with me, I want to keep this video concise and to the point. So the first build that people are already running and is still a viable build and is probably the most popular and standard is just the full instant cast setup that you see over here. Blaze, Reverse Gravity, Esoteric Reaction, Rhyme Arrow, your choice of a counter skill like Squall, or the Shield for, staying in Boundless MP a little bit easier, Frost Call, Seraphic Hail, and Punishing Strike. You can see here that I have all the skills minus the counter max, with the exception of Frost Call, which is at 10. This is simply because Frost Call is one of your lowest damaging skills compared to the rest of the skills that you see here. The tripods are nothing crazy, right? I've shown this in many different videos, but I'll quickly go over them in case some people are interested. And for the runes, it's just a mixture of Gale Wind, Rage, Quick Recharge. A lot of this stuff tends to be personal preference. For the gems, I have a damage gem on every single skill, so Blaze, Reverse Gravity, Esoteric, Rhyme, Frost Call, Seraphic Hail, and Punishing Strike. And I have a cooldown gem on Blaze, Reverse Gravity, Esoteric Reaction, and Rhyme Arrow. So one of the questions I get the most on this channel is, hey, why do you use a cooldown gem on Blaze, or why do you use a cooldown gem on Reverse Gravity? Well, Reverse Gravity is our highest DPS skill, in theory of course. In a real raid it drops a little bit below, but nevertheless is a really strong skill. It helps you stay in Boundless MP because its cooldown is low and costs a lot of mana, so this is why I take this cooldown gem here. For Blaze, it's more of a personal preference. A lot of people tend to also put it on either Punishing Strike or Seraphic Hail or Frost Call. It's really up to you. I personally take it here because it makes Blaze and Reverse Gravity sync up quite nicely, and the rotation just feels overall a little bit more smooth to me. And Blaze actually does a good bit of damage. A little bit less than Seraphic Hail overall. So that's why I do it, but if you're doing it with Punishing Strike or Seraphic Hail or Frost Call, honestly, in the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Engravings are Reflux, Adrenaline, Grudge, Keen Blunt Weapon, and Hitmaster, pretty standard. I'm not using Final Strike, so I can use Keen Blunt Weapon. If you are using Final Strike, then consider using Curse Stall. And just to simulate some support buffs, I have max MP increase for the mana buffs, and Spirit Absorption for the Yearning buffs. So this would be the traditional Reflux build that a lot of people use. There's nothing really to it, you just kind of go up to the boss, and you just spam all of your spells. There's not really rotation, you generally want to stack up Adrenaline before hitting Punishing Strike, and you want to cycle your low cooldown skills before you cycle your high cooldown skills. And that's the general idea of the build. Nothing too crazy. Now, given that a lot of raids in this game are burst oriented, meaning you only have specific windows to do damage, we're seeing this a lot in the newer raids as well, and with things like atropine potions and support buffs and support identity, it turns out having a little bit of burst into your build is a very, very important thing. Before, the common choice that people go to, myself included, would consider using the skill Doomsday. Even though it's a little bit more difficult to land, it does kind of stall your rotation a little bit and it's not as smooth. It gives you that extra little bit of burst to push damage when, well, you can. But with the, changes to explosion, a lot of people have been asking, well, can I use this skill instead? So naturally speaking, if you're going to try and slot in this skill, you have to decide what to replace. And given that Frost Call is probably the weakest skill out of all of these that you have here, Frost Call makes a natural choice and is what most people in Korea are doing. Now, a kind of argument against this would be the fact that in this case, Frost Call helps you stay in balanced MP, which as we all know is the preferred state for dealing damage as Reflux. But I can think of many situations where you'd rather be in Magic Addiction when it's about to burst, because Magic Addiction increases your damage of one cycle of spells, and then you might have to dodge or do a mechanic, one cycle of spells or two cycle of spells, and so on and so forth. And of course, given that some mechanics are just straight up cutscenes or you can't even cast your spells during them, while Frost Call does help, a lot of people have just kind of favored more burst damage, just push more damage and so on and so forth. Because to be honest, Reflux is definitely one of the weaker specs out there. So in this case, I'd probably take away points from Frost Call like this. I'd take away the quick recharge rune as well too and remove it from my bar, and then put those points into Explosion. Now, given that you only have 2 maxed out tripods to use, you can just leave Ignite at level 1 because it honestly doesn't do much damage, take Backfire at level 5, and Magic Amplification at level 5 as well, and you could slot that in. Now, given that this is a build designed to do a little bit more burst, leaving the skill at level 10 leaves a little bit to be desired, so what I would recommend doing in this case is probably raising this up to level 12, and then taking away a point from Seraphic Hail and a point from Blaze. So you might say, hey, why not put Blaze to level 10 and Seraphic Hail to 12? It turns out you gain a lot of damage from a skill going from level 10 to level 11. So generally speaking, it's better to have 2 level 11 skills than one level 10 and one level 12 if they're doing a similar amount of damage, which Blaze and Seraphic Hail do. For the rune, I'd heavily recommend Galewind, even though they did buff the casting speed and animation. In my extended testing, it's still really clunky and slow. I wish they would buff it a little bit more and remove the recoil, which is something I really don't like. So in this case, I'd probably take the Galewind off Esoteric Reaction and put it over here. And then probably take a, Blue Galewind, because Esoteric Reactions are pretty clunky skill. I like to cast my skills as fast as possible. If I could find a Galewind rune, or am I out? I have it on my Squall, so I'd probably move it here, and maybe put like, Quick Recharge or Rage or something like that on this, right? So something like this, of course, everything is personal preference, but that's kind of something I would like to do. As for the gems, given that you want to basically cycle between using this as a finisher to these skills or this as a finisher to these skills, you really don't need a cooldown gem on Explosion, and so what you can do is just put a damage gem on it like this. Pretty much take care of it like that. So overall, the skill build then would look something like this. You have a damage and cooldown on all of these, and you have a damage gem on these, and again you can take this cooldown gem from Blaze and allocate it as you please depending on your personal preference. So with this now you have 2 skills that do a little bit more oomph, and you can sync it with atropine and things like that. And the rotation again is pretty much similar. The idea is you want to prefer your lower skill cooldowns first to make sure you're burning that mana and staying in boundless MP, and then when you have nothing else to cast, you prioritize Punishing Strike first because it does more damage, and then you cast Explosion when you have nothing else to do. Yeah, and that's the basic gist of this build. So of course, another build that you can do is replace this with Doomsday instead. That's the current build that I'm using, and you can find that on my channel if you want to see the settings for that. But the last build that now kind of becomes possible with this patch is a build that takes all three of your big burst skills: Explosion, Punishing Strike, and Doomsday to create kind of a little pseudo burst, similar to what casting Reflux does, but without the need to take all-out attack, because these are now instant cast spells, which means that they don't benefit from all-out attack. So that build then would look something like this. You'd probably take away Seraphic Hail. You'd want your three big burst skills to be maxed out, so I'd probably put Blaze at 10 in that case. Take away the rune for this. Take it out of my skills, and then slot in Doomsday like this. Set it to level 12, and because you're replacing Seraphic Hail, which had 3 maxed out tripods, you can take Ignite at level 5, Asteroid, and Magic Amplification. And for this one, you're definitely gonna want a Gale Wind. Between these two skills, this one is the slower one, so I'd probably put the purple Gale Wind here. And for the last one, I'd probably take a Gale Wind and put it on Punishing Strike as well too. A blue one, if I have one around, there it is. And the build would look something like this. If I could zoom up to the runes. Now, the gem situation with this build becomes a little bit complicated, given that Doomsday's cooldown is just naturally longer than the others, and not having a cooldown gem just makes it a really bad skill. You typically want both a damage and a cooldown gem on the skill. So that makes you have to give up a gem from one of these guys over here, and the obvious candidate would be the cooldown gem on Blaze. So for this, we take out the Blaze cooldown gem, we take out the Seraphic Hail damage gem, and replace it with a Doomsday damage gem and a Doomsday cooldown gem. Like this. So overall then, it would look like this. So this build theoretically should have the most burst, because now you have 3 big spells. You can fit that all into Atropine and Dark Grenade and all of that stuff here. And the idea is similar. You want to make sure you cast these spells first, then cast these spells, unless a gimmick or a transition is coming up. You need to squeeze damage in as fast as possible, then you're going to use all of these spells first. So you can see with that, you have this nice rotation where you have Doomsday coming down, Punishing Strike coming down, Explosion coming down, and you can do some reasonable burst damage that the other builds really can't do. Now, of course, if you're kind of used to my testing videos, you're probably saying, well, which one does the most damage? What does it look like when you do extended testing? So, not to put this in this video, because if I put my tests in this video, it usually takes a long time. I've summarized it in one nice little picture that I'll bring up here. So here is an overall view of the 4 builds that I've shared in this video. So the full instant cast build is on the left over there, 8.37 million DPS over 5 minutes. You have the one that slots in Explosion instead, that's 8.19 million DPS over 5 minutes. You have the one that takes Doomsday instead of Explosion as your big skill. That's the build that I'm currently running, that's 8.2 million DPS over 5 minutes. And then finally, the build that takes all 3, the one that I just showed, is going to do about 8.23 million DPS over 5 minutes. So the takeaway from this is that in Trixion, at least, right, under, reasonable circumstances, all of these builds do very similar amounts of damage. And to me, at the end of the day, it comes down to personal preference. So what I want to encourage all of you who are maybe thinking about switching their build is to go into Trixion and try these different variants and see which one feels the best to you. I thought I'd really like this build on the right over here, but in testing I found it to be very, very clunky. Now, right now the market is kind of hot garbage. If we take a look, for example, at the cost of a level 5 tripod for Backfire, yeah, it's not going to happen anytime soon, so I don't really want to test it out. I want the prices to drop a little bit lower. Of course, it's on NA West. If you're on any other server that's a bit more populated, maybe the prices are cheaper. That's for a level 5. I could take a look at level 4. These are probably, okay, still not that reasonable. It's still like 5,000 gold. So I think I'm going to wait a little bit for these prices to decrease. But overall, if I were to summarize all these different builds and their pros and cons, the instant cast one is probably the best feeling to play. It really just gets you into that flow state. You're constantly casting spells, feels really, really good. The con is you basically have no burst, right? You are just an instant cast, small tickling damage, and it's good damage over time, but if the boss goes up and you lose downtime, then you're going to lose damage. Explosion alleviates this a little bit without giving up too much of that instant cast feel. It's a bit clunky, it's a little bit chunky, but it still works out fine. Doomsday is a little bit more clunky in the fact that you have to cast the spell, but you have the benefits of pre-casting before an animation, you have the benefits of doing a little bit more damage, and of course the last one, all being kind of the clunkiest and the slowest to play, offers the biggest burst potential and might be a fun build to play if you can sync up with the support, or if you're doing re-clear content and you just want to, bust through with atropines and dark bombs and things like that. Or play Igniter, whatever you want to do. So that's all I have for you today. I'd love to hear what you think about the new explosion. For those of you who have tried it, in the comments down below, let's start a discussion around the thing, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.